I think one of the biggest things too that people can struggle with having an undefined G center is like shifting in that direction. Like there's going to kind of be a Manny Gen vibe where it's like, oh, this is the kind of branding I resonate with, or oh, this is the kind of messaging that I resonate with. And I think it's just trusting yourself that that's how you're designed to show up. Because if you are trying to operate like a defined G center, then it's just not going to be sustainable, because the one line is going to be seeking that foundational, that safety and security. And I still feel like there's that flavor of the three line in there where it's like you kind of need to experiment, you're investigating all the things, right? So that totally makes sense that this is what you're doing. And then it's through that experience that you're getting these solutions, you're getting these ways of resolving, breaking these patterns, and then you're coming forth as a five line to mentor this. So I'm really curious, like you sharing, instead of figuring out like, oh, what is it that I need to like say for this to make sense? It's like you sharing your process of breaking the fantasies and these cycles in your own life, and how human design has made a difference for that. Yeah, just to give you an example, my vocation is 34, which is in the sacral, the shadow is force. And my conscious sun is 36, my conscious earth is 6. So I talk a lot about my experience of forcing things in my entrepreneurial journey, and how much turbulence and conflict I had, and how, emotionally draining it was. And like I like kind of mesh these three spheres together, the way that I market and share, because my messaging is like to entrepreneurs to bring in human design and Gene Keys embodiment, for them to live their business and their life in alignment, right? So it's like I take those three spheres and I'm like, how can I combine this? So when we look at your three spheres, which I feel like can help with marketing, it's like we're looking at 52. I have 52 in my culture sphere, so I can like totally relate to this.
Yeah.
How do you alchemize stress and dissatisfaction by breaking these cycles of being dissatisfied and stressed out, and coming into like restraining, and where can I put my energy that's going to light me up the most? What is going to bring me the most vitality? How can I anticipate change? Right? And then you kind of move into this, and then we talk about that stillness and bliss. It's like, okay, being patient too. I feel like there's this patience when it comes to vitality and stillness. Even though the 5 is not in there, gate 5 is not there, it's there. And so it's like you have to kind of change, sort of be patient, have this vitality like a plant growing in the light, like you can't force that growth. And then it's something new that comes from that. So I love to see that you're smiling, and I totally have like chills and tickles all over my arms right now, because I feel like it might be landing for you. You feeling this conflict with like, I have so much now energy, like why am I blah blah blah? I think it's unconsciously you're being pulled back in a way as a projector to nurture yourself unconsciously as if you're a projector. And I
Yeah.
really think that unconscious embodiment, like you consciously making an effort to embody that, will allow you to excel more as a generator, because you're giving yourself that foundation to like rest, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, obviously when you look at the emotional projector side, it's like where can you, especially with the undefined G center, go into environments where you're going to be invited to share and your energy is going to be respected, right?
Mhm.
How can you create invitations? That's something that I think is really powerful too. Some people think they have to wait for the invitation, but I think you can create the invitation.
Mhm.
And so what that can look like, because sometimes that might be what you need. If you create an invitation and then you have this unconscious invitation to share your wisdom, and then your conscious sacral authority kicks in, and it's like, do I want to do this? Yes or no? Do I have the energy to finish this? So it's kind of like, it's almost like the projector is going to see things and sort of initiate and create that invitation. And then your sacral side is going to complete it. Right.
Mhm.
So creating the invitation can really look like going into a space being like, hey, I have this wisdom, I have these things to share, are you open to it? And if it's a no, then you're like, hey, respecting my energy, I'm not going to go here. And so I
Mhm.
think that that's something that you can consider, and I feel like there might be less frustration, because then you're unconsciously honoring that projector side of yourself.
I'm curious how, so you've talked a lot about just normalizing the entrepreneurial journey, and I left my job, my safety security. My one line has just been like screaming and my defined spleen, for probably the last, I don't know, I mean, even as I made the decision, it was like, what the what? Definitely starting to think I just need to get a freaking job. But every time I go to like, I think about doing something or I look for something, I'm just like so not lit up.
Mm,
Um,
I know this feeling
yeah,
so well. It's
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 so
like it's like a paradox. You're like, I need safety and security. And then you go and you like look at like, okay, what could I supplement to support me while I continue to pursue my passions as a generator? And then you're looking and like everything's a fuck no. And
right.
it's like, okay, it doesn't make sense to people when we trust our gut, literally, where it's like, okay, I know that this is like not logically working right now, but this is what's lighting me up. And it's like, okay, how far can I take this? Like the riskiness of it, right? It's like you're still going to have that sacral response. And there's that conversation going on between your spleen, right? So that's a conscious conversation inside of you where it's like, okay, this is what lights me up. But then your spleen's going to go off and be like, how's this going to bring you safety and security? So then you have this conversation going on, and then you have this pressure from your root unconsciously coming up to your emotions. And it's like, oh, what are your feelings about this, Lori? Like, can you feel it? Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And then you have that 9 and 52 where it's like, okay, details. What are the details? But then, you need to be still and like not be stressed out. So it's just a lot. I can totally understand the overwhelm in this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Your defined centers are what you're here to share, right? Like that's like consistent energy within you. And so when you look at your undefined centers, this is where you bring fluidity to people, right? So you can help them shift it and see it differently or experience it differently, or you're really going to amplify their identity, right? It's just the way that you're going to work with your people will be in different ways. It might be in a group coaching program, it might be you create an ebook and you sell that. It might be that you do one-on-one sessions. It might be that you have an evergreen. Like there's so many different ways that you can work with your people, and it doesn't just have to be like one way, where some people might just want to do group coaching programs or just do one-on-one coaching. So one of the things that I was thinking of though is when you're talking about creating that offer, this is something that I always love to talk about with generators is the strategy of waiting to respond. I like to say waiting to respond to the environment because you're meant to co-create. So when you think about the offer that you created, did you respond to an idea that you thought, oh, this makes sense for transitioning teachers? Or was it like somebody was commenting on a post, or you had a conversation, or you heard it from multiple places from your environment? And you're like, oh, I'm going to create this offer. So what happened there if you look back?
Yeah, looking back, it was honestly more like I could see what teachers were looking for, but the human design element was totally my own. And I think they were just like, what the fuck is this? You know what I mean? And
Mm.
they were like, I don't, what is she even talking about? Like, I don't need energy work. I need a goddamn job. I need to
So
get out of the classroom.
I just realized that so let's say you have this offer, this human design and helping teachers transition. Before that is where the 41 comes in. And you share, this was
Yeah.
my experience as a teacher. This is what happened. This is what I've done. This is how human design has helped me. Because then you're like actually filling the gaps, and then people are going to be like, holy shit. Like they can see what's happening. You're being a 5 line because you're like, these are my solutions. This is my experience. So like you're doing this, and then it's like, here is my program, my offer, whatever it is, to help you do what I did in terms of breaking these cycles and coming into a new career path or whatever it is that you want to be doing. And I think that's going to help because you probably unconsciously have experienced all of this, especially that one line being unconscious. You've investigated, you've done all the things. It's easier for you to role model it, but you may not be sharing that investigative side of like the why, right?
You should coach people on what your experience has been. You left teaching, like coach people about that.
It doesn't have to be that you're telling people to leave their jobs. It's just like, this is how I discovered what actually lights me up. Do you know that I have a teaching degree?
Yeah, yeah,
I would not say to someone, yes, go to university for 6 years and spend over $40,000 and then start a personal training business and then start a coaching business. Like I would
yeah,
never recommend that to someone
right.
ever. But I would definitely say this is how human design showed me that I was frustrated, that I was out of alignment, that I was doing things I wasn't meant to be doing. And then I started this business. And then this is how human design helped me get in alignment. Right. But
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
I don't, one of the things that I notice is that I've seen some people who've really scaled quickly in their business, and their results, the money that they made, became the evidence of why, so and so should work with you. But I
Yeah.
mean, I'm so transparent about money. I'm so transparent about everything, but I'm being in the embodiment, right? And I feel like even you as a 5 line, like you can still be the embodiment of what it is that you've learned. And that's your story, right? It's not, oh, I left and I made $1 million, because that's not what happened, but that doesn't mean that you're anything less than. Do you know what I mean? There's going to be people who are going to look to you and they've been miserable in teaching and they have no idea what to do, and they've probably looked in the newspaper or whatever to find something, and then all of a sudden they see a lifeline where it's like, oh, you actually get to really connect with yourself on an energetic level that you never even knew existed, and then you can get more clarity on where you want to go next, right? Which is literally that 41 again coming into play. Yeah, learn from failed launches as opposed to being afraid to fail again. I launched, was it in 20 last year? I think I launched like 9 times. Like it was like programs, it was like one-on-one offers, it was so many things. And looking back, I can see that I was responding to my ideas. I was like,
Mm,
oh my God,
mhm.
this is such a good idea. And it's almost like the sacral is not there to differentiate. It's there to
Yeah.
be like yes or no, right? So of
Right.
course it's gonna be like, that's a great idea. And then I go and I start doing all the things, and I like go and I launch, and it's literally crickets, like
Yeah.
nothing. And so I started to like realize this pattern that I was doing. And then I started to look at, okay, if I respond to my environment and launch from there. Like in April, I created a little masterclass series called Vast Vision, where I was seeing a lot online. People weren't understanding conscious charts, unconscious charts, connection charts, how to use this in business. And I learned these things from SSCC with Eden, but I had
Mhm.
also taken it deeper for myself. And I was like, oh, I'm going to create a masterclass series to teach people how to use this and interpret it. And like 16 people signed up because I
Oh, nice.
responded. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
But I responded to the environment, not just an
Right.
idea. So I
Right.
think that's a really big thing, is I always ask myself, if even if an idea comes to me and it hasn't shown up in my environment yet, I'll wait,
Yep.
and then it'll come up. So I
Yeah.
think that that's something to pay attention to, is responding to your environment, and then looking at also where you have the definition in your chart. You
Mhm.
could even look at the gate specifically. Like you could literally create an offer from 52. Like, how do you restrain yourself from continuing to do the things that you don't want to be doing, and come into this space of stillness and like waiting to take action? Like you could literally take any gate and create
Mm.
something from it, right? And just
Yeah, I
take the
love that
gate
idea.
and take the gates and contemplate, what planet they're in, what line is there, and how you can create something from that, because that energy is sustainably within you. And the undefined centers, it doesn't mean that they're useless. It just means that when people come in, let's say they have a defined throat, you're going to help them have fluidity in how they speak, right? Or they might come in with a certain belief system, and your undefined ajna is going to be like, well, what if you saw it this way, right? So that's how you're gonna loosen things up for people's with those undefined centers.
With your undefined centers, right? So creating offers sort of around that with your one-to-one.
Yeah. So I just spent 3 months working with a 5-1 ego manifester who has an undefined G center. She only has her ego, throat, and ajna defined.
Mm.
And with us, I was very careful with because she has a double reflector, like unconscious, conscious, and then together she's a manifester. So I was
Wow.
very intentional with paying attention to her cycles of energy, in terms of like, hey, you're not a sacral being. Like I would come forth on the calls and be like, hey, these are all the things. This is how we can pivot in your business, and like that G center direction. But then I would always like give her the space and really pay attention to if she was just following like my G center. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that you can still coach from your defined centers. Of course, I think you can do anything, but it's just that there's going to be more fluidity with the undefined spaces.
Also where I can get caught up in just scrolling and I think that one line, I'm like so eager to just learn, learn, learn. So I'm like following people that I want to learn from on Instagram. I'm
Mhm.
not necessarily following people who would be my ideal client or whatever.
This
Yeah.
is it is sustainable, like what you're doing. Because, for example, I don't follow anyone on Instagram. I unfollowed everyone last year in September, and it's always like coaches and entrepreneurs that follow me. And I'm just like, I'm just going to show up, create my things, and share it. Like that's like literally what my strategy is. And I think having an undefined head center, that really tripped me up last year when I was going and seeing what other people were doing. And so I always recommend people who have an undefined head center to take that break. And yeah, if it means you only follow a certain amount of people or you unfollow everyone for a certain amount of time, like do what you need to do. But I think really trust in that, because then all of a sudden you get used to your energy. You're like, oh, I feel my sacral and my root and this. And it's not like, who am I? What do I say? What do I believe? What's next? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
You can do market research. You can create things to respond to. Like I've done, let's say, for example, and I couldn't believe this, how efficient this was. This was months ago. I was like, hey, I want to launch. And it's funny because this is what I'm launching now is my mastermind. It's like, okay, I have this idea that came to me. I can see where people need support, but it hasn't fully hit me as a hell yes yet. And I did market research. I dropped into a couple Facebook groups. I shared on my stories, sent to my email list, a Google form. And I said, I'm gathering information about what you want to see in the online space, like what kind of courses you want to do. Do you prefer one-on-one? Do you like group coaching? What was great about group coaching? What was not? I did market research so I could gather what my audience was experiencing. And
Mhm.
then I did it like have it open for like a week. And then I offered like a 30-minute reading. So there was incentive for people to fill it in. All of a sudden I had all this information and I was like, oh my God, like now I know what to write on my landing page. Now I know specifically if I'm going to create modules, like what they need. And now I
Yeah,
know that when there's a group container, to make sure that everyone gets time to speak, because a lot of people feel unheard and then they're going to people please and not say anything, right? That gave me so many things to respond to. So I think that that's something you can do as well. And it'll give you more clarity. Like email your email list with the teachers and be like, hey, this is what I want to create, and get them to fill out the form, and it'll be so helpful. I love doing that. I kind of create as I go and I co-create with my people.
yeah,
And even if there's a little engagement or no engagement, if there's no engagement, I'm like, oh, this isn't it then. When you go to do this market research, if you start to see, just ask questions where you can get them to talk about their pain points and their problems, like what they're struggling with. Cause I think it's a 5-1. That's like a really great way for you to get clarity on like what your ideal client needs. And then from there, you can play with the different ways that you can support them through systems.
okay.
I
Oh,
think
yeah, okay.
that makes it, because it might be, oh, they want one-on-one coaching. That would be better. Oh, they want to be in a community where they feel like they're not alone as they leave their teaching jobs. You know what I mean? So you can play with that. I mean, the biggest thing is with the emotional wave is time. Like just giving your and I think honestly, if you tie in the emotional wave to the projector side of you and be like, what would a projector need right now? I think that's actually going to help you process a lot easier, because I think it's different if you have an emotional wave that connects to the sacral, but you don't. The emotional wave is going to the root.
Yeah,
So can look at it from like a circuitry
yeah.
perspective, whether it's collective, tribal, and so on, or you could look at it what, what center is this connecting to? So that can be a point of contemplation for you. I think will
Yeah.
help you.
Just curious, my only defined channel is 3457. Do you have any thoughts about like leveraging that?
The
Yeah.
channel of power, and it's like to use your life force energy, because the 34 is like that sacral energy, right? It's like force, strength to
Mhm.
majesty. And then we go into the 57, and this is obviously coming from the spleen, which is like intuitive driven. And so this is really going to motivate you and empower you to create a better future. So it's so funny that it ties into the 41 in a way too, where it's like, okay, how can we shift these fantasies and anticipate change? So I
Mhm.
think one of the things too is paying attention to, so 34 is in your Neptune. So the Neptune is like things feeling elusive and like spiritual life purpose. So it's like a very spiritual thing. So it's like, I think the way you can contemplate this channel is like, how can you bring spirituality and intuition into the now? You started doing that when you moved away from teaching and you started to come into your business, and it quote doesn't make sense because it's just you're following your gut response, like you're following your intuition, which is physical awareness, right? And
Yeah.
that spiritual awareness and that inner knowing, like when you have your spleen defined, it's like you have this constant inner knowing, what's best for you, what's healthiest for you. You can literally share in your story with marketing how your sensitivity to knowing that, let's say teaching wasn't for you, you wanted to move away from that, like there was a codependency, right? The stability, like teaching, you get summers off, you get
Really.
benefits and retirement and so on. There's this codependency, but you weren't lit up by it. right? And then we come into the sensitivity, which is like knowing your needs, which I still feel like ties into the 5734, this intuitive
Mhm.
knowing of like what's in the now. And then sacrifice is really like what is not serving you, like what is it to be released in order to make space for what it is that you want. And that's literally like your prosperity, the pearl gets unlocked once and you have 41 in your vocation and your culture. So once it's like you break these cycles, you alchemize these cycles, it's going to help you access that point of like being sensitive and knowing what it is that's going to bring you the most prosperity. And you can share that in your marketing, like in the way that you tell that story. I've like looked at the Gene Keys book, but I think with my open throat and open ajna, I just look at the words and I let this intuitive like drive be like, Kayla, how can you tell a story from this? You know, because if you think about sacrifice, even what you just said about sacrificing yourself, in order to become an evolved version of ourselves and move on, we have to sacrifice a
Mm.
previous version of ourselves, right?
Yeah,
But I
that's
think
true.
that I feel like there's this whole thing about sacrifice being a bad thing. And it's, you know, you see in the movies and it's all like, you know, it could be religious or it could be like a gore horror movie and there's sacrifice happening, but it doesn't have to be dramatic like that. It can just be like a closure, like a chapter closing, you know?
I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. All right.